Hey guys, this is James. Hey, hope you're having a good evening. Hey, I just want to share some thoughts that have been on my mind the last half hour. I just got done with a Bible study, my men's Monday night Bible study group, BSF, and we are going over the book of Genesis. And today we went over parts of Genesis 11 and Genesis 12. And I love Genesis 12. Genesis 12 is basically where Abram, or who would be later known as Abraham, is first introduced. And here, Abram is approached by the Lord and says, I will make a great nation of you. And if you know the story of Genesis 12 and Abram, is Abram's wife, Sarah, or then known as Sarai, was barren, meaning she could not have children. And at the same time, Abram was pretty old, and he left his family from a pretty wealthy city, Ur of Chaldeans, and the Lord just says, leave that country, and I'm going to go to Canaan. I'm going to make a great nation out of you. So the term "great nation" to me is pretty important, because great nation implies two things. It implies land, and it also implies people. And so here's Abram. How is he going to have people if he can't even have children? And how is he going to have land when the land that God told him to go to is full of Canaanites, people that are pretty big and powerful that could easily kill Abram? And so it really starts to introduce, the main characteristic of Abram, faith. He's often known as the father of faith. So what is faith? You jump to Hebrews 11:1 in the New Testament. It says, faith is sure of what you hope for and certain of what you do not see. And I love that verse, because that's exactly what it is, sure of what you hope for and certain of what you do not see. You guys go ahead and dissect that verse on your own. I love it. Some other translations, it's worded a little bit differently, but I think the essence is still captured. So anyway, I love the story as chapter 12 unfolds, because Abram then, he kind of moves toward Canaan, and then, God, the Lord reminds him that it's full of Canaanites, and that, that he will give this land to his people. And Abram, in an act of faith, builds an altar as a remembrance of his encounter with the Lord there. And then chapter 12, the last part of chapter 12 kind of takes a twist. As he continues in his journey, he ends up going south of Canaan, which is known as the Negeb, and then a famine hit the land. So because of this famine, Abram actually goes into Egypt instead. Depending on who you speak to and their interpretation, I think this is a deviation from God's plan. God never really told him to leave, regardless of any famine or not, but that's what he did. And so that was Abram's first lack of faith. A famine hit. Oh, I better leave. I better go ahead and go to Egypt, because there's no famine there. So as he approaches Egypt, he also realizes that Pharaoh is probably going to want his wife Sarah. Why? Because Sarah was a beautiful woman, and Pharaoh's Pharaoh. He's going to get who he wants. And so he decided to lie to the Egyptians and say, hey, look, Sarah is, that he told the Egyptians that Sarah is my sister. So, because if he would have said that was his wife, then they probably would have killed Abram, and Sarah would have been taken as the wife of Pharaoh. And so he lied. He got to Egypt, and he basically said, this is my sister instead. So they believed in him for a short time, until such time that plagues and such hit Pharaoh's house, and Pharaoh realized the truth, and he approached Abram later on and said, hey, dude, what's the problem? Why didn't you tell me this is your wife? And instead you told me this is your sister. And Abram, probably shaking his boots, thinking he's definitely going to die now, right? He probably thought he was going to die then. He's more than likely going to die now. Instead, he is given actually a gift of grace. This is probably one of the first acts of grace from God. Instead, Pharaoh just says, tell you what, just take your wife, leave, and you can have all the gifts that we gave to you. And so instead of getting killed, Abram walks out with his wife, with all the treasures that he was given. When this is before they found out that Sarah was his wife, and he also walks out with his life. So the guy lies, and instead he walks out with his wife, and a whole bunch of treasures, and the treasures being servants and slaves and animals and that sort of stuff. And so I look at that, I'm like, wow, that's a gift of grace from God right there. Right, he sinned, he disobeyed. He disobeyed several times, actually. He deviated from the journey going toward Canaan, and he went south because of a famine. I love that part, because how often does something happen in our lives, that we deviate from God's plan and we take over because, we didn't anticipate that happening as part of God's plan. It's happened to me a million times. You guys know what I'm talking about. God gives you a plan. You're like, okay, I'm going to do this, God, because I'm going to obey you. I love you. I have faith in you. And then something happens. Maybe a death in the family. Maybe money matters. Maybe a divorce. I don't know. A famine. Maybe a famine hits your land, literally. I don't know. And then you decide to take matters into your own hand. And next thing you know, you're doing things against God's will. In Abram's case, he ended up going to Egypt and lied. But yet God still shows his grace. That's who he is. We often think of grace as a concept in the New Testament when God's grace is very evident in the Old Testament. Right there in Genesis 12, it's very evident. So this is part of God's character. So I just submit to you, how is your faith? Abram is known as a father of faith, but in this specific instance, he lost his faith because he was painted into a corner. He didn't know what to do. He just took over and this, says, God, I'll get back to you later. I'm going to take care of this. So I've done it countless times in my life where God has given me a plan in my life, and I took over because my circumstances didn't seem, wasn't part of God's plan. I just said, God, I got this, and that's what I love about this story. It's real, it's transparent. It's not, some goody two-shoes story about, people in the Bible doing God's will and they get rewarded. It's a story about who God's people are and who they, and the mistakes they make. And God always comes out on top. Sometimes he'll dole out consequences and sometimes he'll dole out grace. I don't know his logic. It's not up to me to decide. His ways are higher than my ways, and, I'm not him. So, but God is always good. So anyway, thanks for listening to this message. And I submit to you, you'll read Genesis 12 tonight and ask yourself, how strong is your faith given certain circumstances that might happen in your life or have happened in your life? So anyway, thanks for listening, and God bless. I'll talk to you guys soon.